of a week. I'm
Good evening, Earth.
humbled
This
and
is Adam
amazed
Sturch broadcasting
to
from the
see
Mushroom
so
Mansion
many
House, New
people
Mexico,
turned out
working on
for
oil
this.
painting
And
contact. Alright,
basically, I'm
we
here
have
to
a pretty
promote
good
a new
foreground
book of
image
mine
happening,
called Food of the
developing
Gods,
anyway,
from Bantam,
middle
and I
ground,
understand that there are also
and
here
starting to
tonight
be
copies
more
of the
middle
Archaic
background.
Revival,
Now I
which
want
is
a
technically
distance
not
figure
released
right
yet,
about
so
here
you can be
on the
well ahead of the
furthest
curve if you
edge
get a
frame
copy of
of
that. Because I
the
don't think it will be
composition,
generally
and
released
a
for
lake of
about 3
fire
weeks.
that he's sort of standing above.
So,
And so I
let
went
me
ahead and
just
drew
say a
in the
little bit
figure
about this
with
book that I've been
phthalo
working
blue
on for a couple of years, and then we can talk about it for
and cut a line
half hour
for the
or so,
fire
and then
lake,
I'll
which isn't
sign
going to be like a
copies
broiling
for,
hellish lake. It's
the
going to be very
hardcore,
placid, but I want it glowing
so to
orange.
speak.
So here we go. And I think that angle is okay, so
What
it
I
won't
wanted
entirely
to
be the
do
back
with
of my
this book,
head,
The Food of the
I think.
Gods, was I wanted
Zoom in a
to
little more.
set down in as careful and
Maybe
as
not.
well
Actually, let's keep the
documented
hornet
a
in frame just for
fashion as
the
possible
aesthetic of
the
the shot for
argument
the final video.
for
Alright, here we go.
looking
Hopefully
again
it's not my drum.
at the impact of psychedelic plants on human evolution, on the emergence of all of the higher qualities that we associate with our own unique species out of simple animal organization. And I wanted to do this not because I wanted to carry out some kind of academic criticism of the orthodox theory of evolution, although that was part of my intent, but really because I felt that if we could change the way we think about how psychedelics were used in the past, it would change the way we think about these things in our present situation. Many of you probably lived through a portion of the 1960s psychedelic revolution, and there psychedelic plants and experiences and drugs were presented sort of as instantaneous psychotherapy. There was not in the 1960s the awareness that these were not something new, these experiences and compounds, but really what was being discovered was the world's oldest religion as it was practiced during the first million years, before it was taken over by beady-eyed little priests with their shopping lists of moral commandments and prescriptions. Basically, you see, there is a great mystery about human emergence out of animal organization. The orthodox theory of evolution works very well for explaining how higher plants emerged out of simpler plant forms, how higher animals emerged from lower forms. But the great unsolved mystery of evolution generally is located in our own peculiar story. Because in less than a couple of million years, the human brain size doubled during the last 3 million years. This has been called the most explosive development of the organ of a higher animal in the entire evolutionary record. And so then the question becomes, what was the cause? What was the detonator? What was the catalyst which literally revealed the presence of the human soul floating on a platform of primate organization? And the case that I have made is, I think, very simple, very easy to understand, and has deep implications for how we live our own lives today and how we organize our societies today.
Even
It's
though they do dry
a very simple three-step process.
with a little linseed oil there, very well.
As the climaxed tropical rainforests of the cradle of humanity
Ideal for
began to
something like this out
recede
of the tube.
a million or so years ago in Africa, which is the cradle of the human race, our remote fruit-eating ancestors who were perfectly happy having achieved a kind of evolutionary equilibrium in the canopies of these tropical rainforests were forced down onto the grasslands in a situation of great evolutionary pressure. They were having to learn new forms of locomotion, bipedalism, a new way of coordinating the visual system, binocular vision, and most importantly, they were coming under dietary pressure. And one of the points that I make in my book very strongly is that orthodox thinking about evolution has never admitted the importance of diet into thinking about evolution. We all know that evolution proceeds through random mutation,
and
which
for any
then
Terrence
meets
McKenna
a
fans
force
on my
called
YouTube
natural
channel.
selection. But usually
I was
random
able to,
mutation is presented as
get away
something
with
which is
a
to be
complete
traced back
audiobook
to cosmic rays
of Terrence McKenna's Food of
and
the Gods,
radiation
not read by
present
Terrence
in the
McKenna,
environment.
but still the
Certainly,
complete
this is
content of his
one
Food
of
of the
the
Gods
inputs
book.
into the
And,
process of
It
mutation.
turned out nicely.
But you see,
It's about
when
8 hours
an
long. It's premiering right
animal
now.
or a human
So it'll still
being
be on by the time this is
suddenly
posted.
expands their diet, suddenly begins to
But I
eat
put his
foods and
radio show
experiment
lecture,
with
I think
foods
it's
that they have
bookstore,
never experimented
on
with
for doing this
before,
right now.
these foods, these plants,
It's kind of a-
contain all kinds of exotic chemicals.
Warm up.
Natural
Doesn't eat our book.
insecticides,
All right.
agents that cause these plants to taste very bitter so that animals will reject them as food. And these chemicals are mutagenic agents. So diet, a sudden shift in diet exposes a population to many more mutagenic influences than it was facing previously. This happened to our proto-ancestors. And as they began testing new foods in the grassland environment of the African veldt, they came upon psilocybin-containing mushrooms, which were
All right,
growing
that's
in the
pretty even.
dung of
10 minutes though, damn.
wild forms of cattle, which were also evolving in this new grassland environment. Well, now the key, or one of the pivotal concepts in my notion, is related to the fact that psilocybin actually in very low doses increases visual acuity, edge detection, and a kind of visual clarity is an affect of very low doses of psilocybin. The equivalent, in fact, of having a plant in the environment which confers chemical binoculars on its user. Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see that if there's a plant which gives better vision and there's a hunting and gathering animal in the proximity of that plant, that the animals that admit that plant into their diet will be more successful hunters, more successful gatherers. They will obtain an expanded food supply for their offspring, and they will tend to outbreed the non-psilocybin using members of the population. Now, at slightly higher doses, psilocybin, like all CNS stimulants, causes what pharmacologists and medical people call arousal. This simply means a kind of undirected restlessness, a state of high alertness restlessness, pacing, and in a highly sexed species like ourselves, it means erection in the male and subsequent sexual activity. This is a second factor then which would promote the outbreeding of the non-psilocybin-using members of the population, you see, because the psilocybin-using members of the population have an expanded food supply, more sex, more offspring. Naturally, they will tend to push out other members of the group. Well, then finally, at the psychedelic dose level of these mushrooms, you get a very important quality, in fact, the centrally important quality from my argument, which any of you who have ever taken these things have experienced yourselves, and that's what I call boundary dissolution. And here's the notion in a nutshell. When you look back through the primate phylogeny, clear back to the primitive primates, the squirrel monkeys and those sorts of animals, there are always what are called male dominance hierarchies. There's an alpha male animal who, through brute force usually, takes the most desirable females under his command and sets his lieutenants over his male lieutenants over the rest of the females. And this is how these monkey societies order themselves. Well, because psilocybin is a boundary dissolving hallucinogen, and because the essence of ego consciousness, which is necessary for these boundary hierarchies, for these dominance hierarchies, the essence of ego is boundary definition. So what I'm actually suggesting in this book is that we self-medicated ourselves into a state of gender equality and partnership, consciously or unconsciously, by allowing this item in our diet which suppressed ego and hence suppressed male dominance hierarchies. And so the ordinary momentum of primate evolution was interrupted. And for a period of about, who knows, pick a number, somewhere between 15 and 50,000 years, ending about 10,000 years
It's very
ago,
thick, so it's slow to apply. But the next layer, which is sort of a glowing out of the center with the yellow and a lighter orange.
Where human beings were at equilibrium and in balance with the earth, where men and women were in balance with each other, and I should have mentioned this sexual arousal, which went along with the mushroom taking, promoted a style.
I hope that wasn't
of
too much on the back of my dome when I was doing the edges there, but I had to lean in front of it to cut in.
Were lunar. At the new and full moon, everybody basically just
minutes
jumps each other's bones in a big heap. And the social consequence of orgy as a social style is that it makes it impossible for men to trace lines of male paternity. This is very important. There is, in a society which practices orgy, no concept for men of my children. There is only the concept of our children, meaning the tribe, the group. So male loyalty goes toward the group. And this is very important because once men discovered male paternity, they discovered ownership of hunting grounds, food supplies, women, you name it. And it tended to feed back into the formation of the ego structure. Well, and so I believe that really that was the golden age of humanity, that we all long for and have a great poignancy for, that has even been called the nostalgia for paradise. I believe we have this nostalgia for paradise because we are the victims of a fall. You see, what happened was this African grassland environment, which was necessary for the ecology of the mushrooms, and therefore necessary to maintain this partnership paradise, eventually it all dried up. The Sahara turned to desert. These people were forced out of Africa into the ancient Middle East, and we fell into history. And this is the moment at which agriculture was invented. Agriculture, because you have to stay in one place and tend the crops and defend the surplus of these successful agricultural efforts, means the end to nomadism. It means the birth of cities. It means the creation through surpluses of classes of those who have and those who have not.
The colors in.
It promotes kingship. It creates the need for standing armies. You can tell the drift here. All the institutions that we associate with male oppression, with hierarchy, with dominance, come into play at that point. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but just in a nutshell, that situation is the situation in which we were born and came to consciousness. The paradisical situation of gender partnership that then dissolved. It was really a return back to the earlier primate style of male dominance and hierarchy when the mushroom was no longer available. We returned to our old monkey ways, and we have been practicing those monkey ways ever since, even as we reach toward the sequencing of the human genome, the exploration of the solar system, the exploration of the heart of matter. Nevertheless, we do it from a psychologically damaged perspective. Now, the question of drugs. Why, as a species, are we so obsessed and so addictable to so many things? There are a few animals who will break into a compound for fermented fruit or something like that, but we addict to dozens of substances and behaviors. Well, I believe that you can make an analogy to a person who was abused or traumatized as a child. The entirety of human history has been acted out in the light of the traumatic severing of our connection into the Gaian mother goddess planetary matrix of organic wholeness that was the centerpiece of the psychedelic experience back in the high Paleolithic. In other words, the world of hallucination and vision that psilocybin carries you into is not your private unconscious or the architecture of your neural programming, but it is in fact a kind of intellect, a kind of being, a kind of Gaian mind. For Paleolithic human beings, it was the great goddess. Once you sever from this matrix of meaning, what James Joyce called the mama matrix, most mysterious, once you sever yourself from that, then you have nothing but rationalism, ego, and male dominance to guide you. And that's what has led us into the nightmarish labyrinth of technical civilization, overpopulation, classism, racism, sexism, propaganda, so forth and so on. All the ills of modernity. So I wrote this book making this argument because I believe that if we could import into straight society, almost as a Trojan horse, the idea that these psychedelic compounds and plants are not aberrational. They are not pathological.
As you can see, the texture in the paint kind of soaks in the yellow and leaves a real fine edge on either side of the brush as you drag it through the depth of the paint.
They are, in fact,
And made some kind of nice rippling water kind of texture. So that kind of does it by itself without really having to blend it out too much. But now I think I'm going to put on a shadow for the figure. And then we'll probably wrap this session up. I just wanted to go a little bit on this tonight.
Primitive societies, shamanism, the psychedelic experience, society's efforts to control and eradicate these substances. And I believe that we are really in a race on this planet now between education and disaster. And it is the momentum of the ego that threatens to shove us over the cliff into Armageddon. Famine, overpopulation, you can kiss goodbye to democratic values. We are all going to live in an Orwellian anthill if we don't, what? Change our minds. We have to change our minds on a dime. I'm not talking about a 500-year program to slowly straighten things out. We have, I believe, less than 30 years to come to terms with the dissolving ozone hole, the toxification of the oceans, the greenhouse effect, the spread of epidemic disease, the rise of fascism, the relentless efforts of the free marketeers to deal products in every corner of the planet. We must change our minds. And what we have to do is have recourse to these same
so I guess Lake Fire, little figure.
Shamanic plants and shamanic practices that allowed our remote ancestors to come to terms with the mystery of being and their situation
Adeline says
on
hello.
this planet vis-a-vis the rest of
and already
nature.
hairballed before she ate.
So
I
think it's very important
Not a
at
hairball
this
backed up
time
by a
to
pint of
make
food,
this argument as
which is
clearly
nice.
as possible,
That's nice.
to launch the
Just a
idea
little slime
into society and let
and fuzz.
let argument
But
and
now she's
debate
fat, happy cat by the
rage.
fire. And that
Now,
puts a
you may
nice layer in
think
on this.
that
The right side, left side is starting to
blowing
get
up
more saturated with the
already
details, so it's time to start fleshing out the details on the right
theory about how
side and
human
middle
beings
ground
came
and
to be.
background
This
before
is
I
not
start
the
working
case.
the translucent
As a matter of
textures
fact, orthodox
across the surface from the
anthropology
patterning
hasn't
of the bald-faced
We are
hornet and the angelfish.
the fly
They'll
in
be
the
sort of
soup
merging
of
into, at
natural
least ideally,
sciences
merging into
explanation
the
of
flower
the
petals
evolution
of the
species.
sunflower.
It's easy to understand
but that's
how
it for
one
now.
kind of hummingbird emerges from another. It's not very easy to understand how creatures
Get in on
that
that
build
texture, see
something
how
like
close I
Los
can get before it
Angeles
fucks up.
can emerge
So
out
the
of
shadow
creatures
turned into a pretty
who
nice
hunt
brushstroke.
ants by sticking grass stems down their holes, you know. We represent some kind of primary break with nature at the animal level. And I believe it's because we have a symbiotic relationship with all of nature.
Have a good
we
night,
are
Earth.
wired for this. There are